Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to DCC Sunday morning service online. We are so happy to have you tuning in with us this morning. Hopefully, by this point, you've gotten yourself a cup of coffee and are settling down in your living room to enter into this time of worship and God's Word. We do just want to remind you that you are still able to drop off your tithes and donations here at the church. Just give us a call ahead of time to let us know on when you're planning to do that. Or if you find it easier, you can also head on to our website and give there. We know how hard it is to remember these things now that schedules and routines have changed, but we just want to say thank you so much for your continued giving during this time. We so appreciate it. Well, before we head into our time of worship together, let me just start us off with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you. We thank you for this time. We thank you for this space, Lord. And we know that right now we might be distanced physically, Lord, but we also know that through your Son's sacrifice, Lord, through his blood, that we are joined together as one body, as one family, as one community. And so my prayer this morning as we are off in different places is that we wouldn't feel like we are alone in a living room right now, Lord, but that we would know that we are a part of a body, of a family, God. So we just pray that that truth lays on our hearts this morning. And so, Lord, we just pray that this time of worship, Lord, would be meaningful, that we would be able to push aside all of the other things vying for our attention, Lord, the distractions right now, that we could just push those things aside, and that we would be able to enter into your presence right now. Lord, we just ask that you would speak to us the things that we need to hear this morning and that we would be able to receive them. We just thank you. We thank you so much that you love us. We thank you that you are a good God. Amen.
Into your courts I will enter, maker of heaven and earth. I tremble in your holy presence. Glory, glory in your sanctuary. Splendor and majesty, Lord, before you all I adore you. All the earth will declare that your love is everywhere. The fields will exalt and seas resound. Hear the trees' joyful cry, praising you, and so will I. A new song I'll sing, Lord, I will glorify and bless your holy name. Jesus, Lord of all life and salvation, into your presence we come. We worship you, our precious Savior. Fill us with your holy power. Set us aflame with your love, till nations all know your glory. All the earth will declare that your love is everywhere. The fields will exalt and seas resound. Hear the trees' joyful cry, praising you, and so will I. A new song I'll sing, Lord, I will glorify and bless your holy name. All the earth will declare that your love is everywhere. The fields will exalt and seas resound. Hear the trees' joyful cry, praising you, and so will I. A new song I'll sing, Lord, I will glorify and bless your name. who made the mountains and the sea, measured out the universe, and you made me. Echoes of the voice that called the world to be, reach throughout the ages and now speak to me. You're my Creator King.
You who made the valleys and the skies, displayed your love on far horizons and before my eyes.
You who lit the stars and set the dawn in time, called them all by name, and now you whisper mine. You're my Creator King. Who am I that you are mindful of me? Who am I that you set your love on me? You're my Creator King. You who made the darkness and the light, sun and moon to watch the day and guard the night, a hand that stretched the heavens like a canopy, reaches down to cover and watch over me. You're my Creator King. And who am I that you are mindful of me? And who am I that you set your love on me? You are mindful of me. And who am I that you set your love on me? You're my Creator King. You're my Creator King. You're my Creator King. We'll be tested by the fire, persecuted and reviled, maybe. Either way there will be trials, we will hold on. We'll be tested by the blessings, with all the comforts of the world surrounding. We will not forget the Savior, we will hold on. We will hold on to your love. We will hold on to your love. When the world is silent, your praise unsung, we will hold on to your love. We'll be tested by the fire, persecuted and reviled, maybe. Either way there will be trials, we will hold on. We'll be tested by the blessing, with all the comforts of the world surrounding. We will not forget the Savior, we will hold on. We will hold on to your love. We will hold on to your love. When the world is silent, your praise unsung, we will hold on to your love. When the battle rages on, when we fail to overcome, in our weakness, Jesus, you make us strong. We will hold on to your love. We will hold on to your love. In our weakness, Jesus, you make us strong. We will hold on to your love.
Good morning. As always, we are just so grateful that you have chosen to spend this time with us. And I don't know if that means you're sitting down right now in your bathrobe with a cup of coffee in hand, or you've gathered the family together after dinner to watch whenever or wherever that is. We just want to say we are grateful that you have chosen to tune in with us, and we can't wait to see you in person again. I want to start this morning with a question, and I want you to think, have you ever been in an impossible situation before? Can you think back in your life or through this year? I bet you won't have to think very far. But can you think back to an impossible situation that you were in? A spot that you found yourself in where it just seemed like there were no right answers and no good paths to take, no matter which way you turned or no matter which path you chose to walk down. Maybe it felt like you were standing in the middle, like I have several times over the last 16 months, that you were standing in the middle of a highway and it didn't matter which way you leaned, you were going to get clipped by something. Some situation where it just did not seem like there was an answer or did not seem like there was a path that you could take that led anywhere good. I've shared this with some of you before, but I want to just share it with you again because it is one of my all-time favorite memories of my wife. A few years ago, Mel, she decided that she was going to go on a cleanse. She was going to do some sort of a cleanse, and I don't know a lot about it. I don't remember what it was called. All I remember is two things. One, it was awful, and two, it was Dr. Oz's fault. Those are the only two things I remember about it. It was absolutely awful, and it was Dr. Oz's fault. She saw it on TV, and she decided that she wanted to do this, and so she got all the information and she went to the website and she wrote it all down and she sat me down one day and kind of laid it all out for me and said, listen, I want to do this. Will you do this with me? I want to do this 10-day cleanse. Will you join me in this together? And I looked at all the information and I listened to her talk, and at the end I said, I'm sorry, honey, but no. I love you, but I think that will kill me. There is just no way that I could survive doing what you are telling me to do. I said, I love you, but no. And she said, listen, I figured you would say that, so let me ask you this. I'm going to do this, and I want you to support me. I'm going to do this, and I want you to encourage me each and every day to stick to whatever the plan is. I want you to keep me on track, and no matter what I do, I want you to promise that you won't let me quit. And so I said, well, as long as I don't have to eat it with you, then okay, I'll do it. And so I remember we started, or I should say she started the cleanse. And on day one, all it was cabbage broth and carrots or something awful like that. I remember walking by the kitchen and just being horrified at what she was about to eat. But it was simple, and she made it that night. And by the end of the next day, maybe 24 hours later, she was kind of encouraged and excited about the whole cleanse. That was day one. But then we got to day two, and she slowed down just a little bit, and she was dragging throughout the day, but she was still motivated, and every time she went to eat that gruel or broth or whatever that stuff was, I was encouraging her and telling her, you can do this, hon. But then day three, in the morning, nothing seemed overly different. But by day three, I remember walking into the kitchen just before lunch, and right there in the middle of the kitchen, I saw my wife, and she was hunched over the counter with 2 mincemeat tarts in hand and just inhaling them. One in each hand for faster delivery, and there was a mountain of whipped cream on each one, and they were disappearing faster than you could imagine. And she was hunched over the counter like this, like some sort of wild animal. And as soon as I walked into the room, her eyes darted over towards me. It felt like a Gollum kind of scene in the middle of Lord of the Rings. And her eyes darted towards me, and before I could even get my first sentence out, I remember saying, "Honey, what are you doing?" I thought, all I heard from her was almost a shout, and she said, "Get me a cheeseburger." That's all she said. "Get me a cheeseburger." And I said, "But honey, you told me a few days ago that I was supposed to," and she just locked eyes with me and she just said, "Get me a cheeseburger." And so I was kind of stuck in that moment. I was torn between two options, and neither one of them seemed overly safe to head down. On the one hand, I was trying to figure out which Mel do I listen to. Do I listen to the Mel from 3 days ago who begged me and pleaded with me to support her and to encourage her and not to let her quit? Or do I listen to the Mel who's standing right in front of me, who's scaring me just a little bit? Would she yell at me if I let her give in? What are you supposed to do in a situation like that? I'm genuinely asking. And so if you're wondering what I did in that moment, fearing for my life, I jumped in the van and drove as fast as I could to McDonald's. Just as fast as I have ever driven to get fast food and back, and I never looked back, because if you saw the look in her eyes in that moment, you would understand. If you could have just seen the look in her eye. See, I know that's a bit of a silly story and scenario, but the truth is life puts us in situations like that all of the time. Life puts us in impossible situations where it seems like no matter which path you take, neither one of them is going to lead anywhere good. Sometimes we're caught at the crossroads of a decision, or we're faced with a scenario that no matter which path you look down, it just seems like either one of them is going to end in some kind of disaster, and you have no idea which way to go. Have you ever felt like that before? Maybe even over the last year, have you ever felt like you just couldn't figure out a way forward that was going to get you to where you wanted to be? Sometimes impossible situations aren't so much about a choice, it's just a scenario that hits you where you feel like you're supposed to be in two places at once, but there's only one of you and you just don't know where you're supposed to be. Working parents, do you feel me on that one? You're supposed to be at home and you're supposed to be at work at the same time, and yet there's only one of you and you just can't possibly be in both places at the same time. Or maybe it's just the fact that your boss at work or somebody in your life has asked you to do something that there is no way that you can pull this off. They don't realize it, but it is completely and utterly unreasonable for them to ask this of you, but they're not aware of that fact. And so all of these situations today, I want to just put under this header of an impossible situation. A situation where there is just no way out. I want to ask you as we get going this morning this question: what do you do in those situations? What do you do when you're caught in a spot and you just don't know which way to go and there is really no clear path forward? How do you handle situations like that? And as a follower of Jesus, how are we called to deal with impossible situations like that? Because if you're not in one right now, I guarantee you sometime in the near future, you're going to be faced with a decision like that. And as we dig deeper into this series, into the book of Daniel, and this series called Exiles, and trying to figure out together what God calls us to do and how He calls us to live while we are living in Babylon, Daniel chapter 2, especially in the first half, is a story of an impossible situation on an epic scale. Daniel is caught in a situation where there is absolutely no way out. And God clearly shows us what to do when you are faced with those kind of challenging scenarios, when there is no clear path forward. How do we handle those situations where you feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place? And as we watch closely what Daniel does, as we watch how he reacts and the things that he says and the order in which he proceeds, you and I can learn a few simple but incredibly powerful things to do when you are caught in a tough situation and you just don't know which way to go. Where you and I can figure out how God is going to lead us out of those types of scenarios. Listen, I believe with all my heart that this past year has been full of impossible situations, and this is exactly where we need to be this morning. So let's read together Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 23. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians and the enchanters and the sorcerers and the astrologers to tell them what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. And the king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me. And once more they replied, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it. Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me. The astrologers answered the king, There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. Listen carefully. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. This made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put to death wise men and men who were... The decree was issued to put the wise men to death. And men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, Why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel, and at this Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Daniel then praised the God of heaven and said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness and dwells with him in the light. I thank you and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. We're going to deal with the second half of this story because the dream in and of itself is worth a whole morning alone. But today we're going to talk about Daniel and the impossible scenario that he is facing. So here's the problem. King Nebuchadnezzar, he had a dream and maybe even had a recurring dream. You might even call it a nightmare because it troubled him. And by the way the Hebrew reads here, it's almost as if he regularly had this dream. And so one day he decided he was going to call all the wise men, all the astrologers, all the magicians in all of Babylon, and he asked them to interpret this dream for him. Actually, he didn't just ask because these kings rarely ask. He commanded them to interpret it for him. Now, the truth is, this would be hard enough on its own to interpret somebody else's dream, especially if you get it wrong with your life on the line, is a difficult task to ask of anyone. But King Nebuchadnezzar, he took this to the next level, and he made this impossible for your average, or in fact, any human being to do. Not only did he want them to interpret the dream that he had, he wouldn't even tell them what the dream was so they would have something to work with. They had to figure out and discern what dream he had and then figure out what the meaning of that dream was and interpret it. Now, some scholars think that Nebuchadnezzar had forgotten the dream, and the reason why he asked them to tell it back to him is because he couldn't quite remember the details. But I don't believe that that's true. The way Nebuchadnezzar talks here, clearly he is using this as a litmus test because truthfully, he doesn't trust these Chaldeans. He doesn't trust these astrologers and magicians, and he's fairly certain that they are just begging for time so that they can spin some sort of tale. So he withholds the dream and he demands that they interpret it, and if they don't, it's going to cost them their lives and their houses and their families. So I want you to imagine just for a second what kind of a request that this was. I want you to imagine that tomorrow morning, on Monday morning, when you go into your work, your boss says this to you. He says, I had a dream last night. I had a dream that really troubled me, and I want you to tell me what that dream was and interpret it for me, or you're fired. Go. What would you do? I was thinking about impossible situations like this, and it reminded me of the times that I've come home, and maybe in marriage you've had this experience too, where I've come home and my wife was clearly upset. Her arms were crossed, her foot was tapping at 100 miles an hour, and she was just staring at me as I walked in the door, and I remember saying, "Hi, honey, are you okay? What's wrong?" And she would just say something like, "You know what's wrong." I say, "Well, what's the matter?" She says, "You know what you did." And the truth was, I had no idea what I did. And you see, marriage is full of these, but it was just an impossible spot to be in. And the wise men who were part of Babylon's court here, they just pleaded with the king, and they told him that he was being unreasonable. They said, "King, the thing that you are asking here, no one has ever asked the wise men of Babylon to do." And maybe you've realized this before too, but telling someone they're being unreasonable when they're being unreasonable usually doesn't turn out that well. And so the king was so upset, he was so angry that he threatened them and said, "If you do not interpret this for me, you will pay for it with your lives. I will turn your houses into rubble." And the way that the original languages read, it's almost as if he is going to turn them into public washrooms, into latrines in the middle of the city. That is how upset and angry Nebuchadnezzar was. And so unbeknownst to Daniel and all of his friends, this is all happening. And then one day, Arioch, the king's commander-in-chief, was out there, the head of his guard. He was the axe man. He showed up at Daniel's door and he knocked and he says, "I'm sorry, Daniel, but I'm going to have to kill you. I'm truly sorry, Daniel, but this is the way this has to go." All of a sudden, Daniel is standing there staring at a man, an executioner at his door, and he is just finding out about the situation, just finding out about what is going on. He has no time to think, no time to plan. There is a man standing there with an axe in hand with his name on it. And I just want you to imagine and just to realize how incredibly tense this moment would have been. No information, no idea what's going on. So verse 14 here for me has been one of the most incredible lines in this story. Daniel is faced with an impossible scenario. He has no time to think and no time to plan, and this is what it says. Daniel spoke to Arioch. Daniel spoke to him with what? Wisdom and tact. Remember those two words. Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact, faced with a life-threatening situation, faced with an impossible scenario. Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. You see, if there is anything that you and I need in impossible situations, it's these two things. We need wisdom and we need tact. It's funny because those are the very things that are the first to go out the window as soon as a tense situation comes our way, isn't it? Wisdom and tact are the first things to exit our mind. As soon as fear and stress rush in, wisdom and tact often rush out. As soon as somebody comes up to us and raises their voice with us, our first reaction is to raise our voice to match their level. As soon as somebody comes into our world and threatens us, our response is to armor up and to fight back. Wisdom and tact are the last things on our mind when we are in these kind of situations, and yet it's remarkable, it's incredible as you watch Daniel, who is faced with a life and death scenario at his door. The first reaction he has is this, is he doesn't panic. He doesn't scream, he doesn't run around, he doesn't run away, he doesn't freeze or overreact. The first thing he does is he responds to Arioch with wisdom and tact. See, what is the first thing that he does when he is faced with a situation like this? This is actually remarkable. It's worth the price of admission for this morning anyways. The first thing Daniel does when he is faced with a scenario like this is he asks a question. He asks a question. He doesn't make a statement. He doesn't yell and scream and charge. He asks a question. He says, what would make the king issue such a harsh decree? What kind of a situation are we dealing with? Why are we in the situation that we are in right now? Why would the king do something so harsh? See, wisdom is the skillful application of knowledge. Wisdom is not just knowing the truth, but knowing what to do in a situation. It's not just knowing what's true, but knowing what to do when you're faced with a problem. Tact, on the other hand, tact is the ability to say something that will make the situation better and not worse. Tact is the ability to respond in a situation where your words actually bring healing and progress rather than tension and animosity. Wisdom in one hand, tact in the other. Tact is that thing you wish you had used after you blew your lid and lost your cool. Tact is the thing that you wish you had used when that fight blew up in front of your face when it didn't have to. One handful of wisdom, one handful of tact. That's the picture of Daniel in this story. And as Christians, we are called to use both of those things. You see, I've noticed this, and I've thought about this a lot lately, especially watching the way that Christians have been represented in the news and in the media and in our tense and ever-present world right now. And sometimes we think as Christians that just because we have the truth, that means we don't need tact. Just because we have the truth that God has given us and we know the revelation that He has made known to us, just because we have the truth, we assume that we don't need tact. But over and over again in the book of Daniel and all throughout the book of Esther and throughout the wisdom literature and the life of Jesus, God teaches us things that we as Christians, we are called, even in the most tense and dangerous situations, to use both of these things, both wisdom and tact. God shows us how valuable, wisely chosen, and respectful words can be. Instead of being a bull in a china shop, God has called us to be delicate, to use a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. See, I've had this experience so many times in my life, and I think you have as well, but I was thinking back to last summer. Many of you know we had a flood in our basement here in Dresden. We'd only been living in the house for about 15 months, and then we got water. Somehow it backed up into our basement, and everywhere you looked in the basement, there was damage. It was pretty incredible, though, when the insurance adjuster came through and had finally assessed all of the damage that it was going to take to clean it up and to put it back together. It was something like $34,000, all from a few inches of water in the basement. Now, I remember seeing that number and it taking me just about a day to pick my jaw back up off of the floor, but I figured at least you have insurance. As much as this is a hassle and it's irritating and frustrating, at least you have insurance. Except if you've ever dealt with insurance companies before, you know that sometimes they aren't as cooperative as you would like. See, after all the hard cleanup was done, when it came time to pay and to hire out all the contractors to come and fix it, the insurance company that we were dealing with, they kept delaying and asking for more information and sending out different plumbers and specialists. And they kept sending email after email, and they eventually, towards the end, began to signal that they weren't going to pay the claim at all and that we were going to be responsible for the entire bill. I remember when I started to get those, there were 55 emails that passed back and forth. 55 emails. And towards the end, I could just feel my blood pressure and my frustration rising. I was livid. I mean, what's the point in paying for insurance that when you actually have a problem, they don't cover it? So I did what I do often in these situations is I kind of armored up. I got a bunch of professionals and specialists. We took pictures. We got one of them willing to go on record to say that this is what happened and this is how it happened. We got all sorts of evidence together. And when I finally had my case assembled, I called that insurance company and I found the adjuster who was working on our case. And I remember as I was gearing up for that conversation, I had all my information. I could feel I just ready to give both barrels as I talked to him on the phone, and I was ready for a fight. And when I finally got to him on the phone and I was ready to launch into my spiel that I had already prepared, I felt the Lord stop me just for a second and say, hold on. Just hold on. Ask him how things are going. See, I was geared up and ready for a fight. I was completely locked and loaded and ready to go, but the Lord paused me in that moment and he just said, hold on. Just hold on. Just ask him how things are going before you lose it. And so I got on the phone with him and I just said, hey, my name is Chris. This is where I live. This is our claim number. I was just curious how things were going. And then on the other line, I could hear a bunch of typing, and then he checks. He's like, well, we're just waiting for this thing to come in, and I guess we have that. And he says, okay, I still need this to come in because we were going to send and he says, oh, I guess we have that. And then he checked one or two more things, and I heard a little more typing. He says, oh, I guess, Mr. Quiring, it seems like we have everything in order. When would you like me to cut the check? And I was like, is this a trick question? I didn't say that. I said, now? Now. How about right now? And he says, okay, the check is in the mail. It'll be at your place within 4 business days. And I think back to that story often as I was listening to the way that Daniel responded in an unfair, in a dangerous, in a difficult situation. And it just reminded me of this truth that just because we are called as Christians to teach the truth, it doesn't mean that we don't need tact. Just because we are Christians and we have the truth, it doesn't mean that we don't need tact. And I want to remind you this morning that sometimes wisely chosen and patient and careful words can do what fury can't. I believe this is what Jesus meant when he said we are called to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. As wise as serpents and innocent as doves, that picture has come back to me many times in ministry. And maybe, just maybe in the situation that you are in right now, God is calling to remind you that just because you have the truth doesn't mean that you don't need tact. And sometimes wisely chosen and respectful words can unlock doors that fury and anger and frustration never, ever can. Perhaps this is what God is calling you to use in the situation that you are facing right now. So what does that look like? What does it look like to use wisdom and tact? You can distill Daniel's response in this story down to 3 questions and 3 asks that he makes, and they're my 3 challenges for us today. 3 steps that we can take when you are faced with a situation that simply does not have a good option left or right to take, and here is what they are. The first is this, is to slow down and ask for time. Slow down and ask for time. The very first thing that Daniel does when he is faced with a situation that he neither understands nor knows how to deal with, and he is facing incredible challenges within it, is he goes to the king and he asks him for time. See, this is profound because most of us don't realize it, but the majority of the mistakes that we make in life, we make because we made the decision by ourselves or we made it in our own strength. The majority of the bad decisions that we have made in life, we have made because we made them by ourselves, in the moment, in our own strength. Often in these situations, we let our emotions bubble up or our panic set in, or we choose some reactionary way to respond to the challenge or the scenario that we are facing, and we let ourselves make that decision. And the first thing that Daniel does is he refuses to allow any kind of emotion to dictate what happens next. He asks for time. Not for an infinite period of time, not for a year, not for a month, not for a week. He asks for one day, and he goes into the king and he says, "King, give me one day. I will consult my God and I will have an answer for you." Now, maybe you noticed this and maybe you didn't, but did you notice that the wise men of Babylon also asked the same question of the king? They asked for more time, and the king said no and threatened to turn their houses into rubble. But when Daniel comes in, all he asks for is a day, and the king grants him that day. You see, the difference between the two, I believe, was the difference between being a bull in a china shop or speaking with wisdom and tact. And Daniel found favor in the eyes of the king because he was respectful and he was honest and he was open. And he says, "King, just give me a day to think and to pray." The reason why this is so valuable for us when we are in situations like this is because haste is the enemy of wisdom. Hurry is the enemy of wisdom. Hurry doesn't give God time to speak to you. Hurry doesn't give you time to seek the scriptures and to search through them. Hurry doesn't give you time to ask the wise people around you that you have put in place for situations just like this. Responding in the moment or responding with emotion, haste is the enemy of wisdom. So the first thing that Daniel does, and this is what we can do when we are in situations, is just to slow down. To slow down and to ask for a little more time. I remember when Mel and I were first moving to Ontario, the first car I ever owned was a lowered red 2-door Acura Integra. It was lowered to about 4 inches off the ground, and I remember it was a fun car, but it was anything but a practical car. And when we were moving to Ontario, there was no way we were going to fit any of the stuff that we needed to bring here, so I needed to buy a new car. That, in addition to the fact that that car was so low that I used to plow the streets of Winnipeg long before the plows ever got out on the winter storm day. It was so low that my bumper used to push away for other people to travel around the city, and it wasn't exactly the safest way to travel. So we needed a different car. And so I went shopping around, and we found a black Acura, a 4-door. I liked the car brand, and I decided to stick with it. And we went really quickly. There was only 2 weeks left. We went to buy the car. We saw it in an hour, took it for a test drive, gave the guy cash by the end of the day, and it was all over, and we had taken it home. It was fast. But in all the rush, I never realized that while we were test driving, there was a funny sound coming from the back half of the vehicle, and it was loud enough that I should have been paying attention to it. That sound, a week later, I found out turned out to be both struts had been blown and both bearings in the back needed replacing. And it cost me $2,000 in that 1 week before we were about to pick up shop and move to a completely different province. And it all happened because I made the decision too fast. And not to mention, when I went to change the oil a few weeks later and I pulled out the dipstick, I am still mad at my dad for not telling me to catch or to check this when we were there. Isn't this what dads are for? I remember we pulled out the dipstick and it was midnight black. Like it was thick and black, it was dirty and ugly, and it looked like it hadn't been changed in years, and I just stood there staring at it, wondering, what in the world have I bought? That was the worst car we ever owned. And the reason why that happened, I was in a hurry. I was rushed. I was in haste. And I think for many of us to stop from getting into those kind of situations, Daniel models something beautiful and powerful for us here. Is he begins with a question, and the question is simple. Can I have a day to think and to pray about this? Give me a day to consult with God and the people that I trust and that I care about. When you are faced with an impossible situation, slow down, ask for time. Because God can work in those intervening hours, just like he did in Daniel's life, and he can work in yours, but you need to give him a little bit of time. The second thing that Daniel does after he slows down and asks for time is he looks up and he asks for wisdom. The second thing that Daniel asks for in this situation is he slows down, asks for time, and then he stops and he looks up and he asks for wisdom. You can see that he's looking to God for this because you look at the way the magicians and the astrologers are talking in this, and they say this, they say, what the king asks is too difficult. What the king asks, no one can reveal to him except the gods, and they do not live among men. You see, often I think that we put God in a box in these kind of situations. Often we have a little set of territory in our hearts and our lives where God inhabits, and everything else is where we are in charge of making those decisions. We kind of assume that spiritual things, that's God's department. We assume that anything to do with heaven or our spiritual lives or our souls, that is God's department. But work, when I have a work problem, that's something that I need to figure out and I need to take care of. Or when I have a financial problem, that's a scenario that I'm amazed that I got to find a way out of. Or when you have a family or a relational problem, I got to figure that out on my own. And we kind of think of life in these different spheres. God has a sphere over here, and when we have a God-style problem, we go to him. But when there is a work problem, that's a different sphere. And relationships and family, that is a different sphere. And finances, that is a different sphere. And what we forget is this, is that all wisdom is God's wisdom. Amen? All wisdom is God's wisdom. All truth is God's truth. All physics are God's physics. All math is God's math. All science is God's science. All management and relationships and finances, these are all God's spheres because God himself created them all. And there is no sphere that God is not completely and utterly in command and control of. You see, the wisdom that makes the world work is actually his wisdom. The way that Proverbs talks is the wisdom that makes the planet spin like clockwork that's God's wisdom at work. And what I want you to realize from the story of Daniel is this, is that they are all God's spheres. Each and every one of the problems and situations that we face, they are all God's spheres. So when you have a work problem, ask God about the solution. When you have a family problem, ask God about which wisdom you need to choose the right path. When you have a financial problem or a dream problem like Daniel had, don't go everywhere else to the magicians of Babylon. Go straight to the source and say, God, listen, this is my problem, and I know that you are Lord and King over all. And God, I need an answer to this question. So step number 2 is this, is to look up. Is to look up and ask God for wisdom, because all the worldly wisdom of Babylon isn't enough, but the wisdom of God is always enough. I love the way he says this to Daniel. He says he gives wisdom to the wise. He gives knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness. Daniel says, you have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. This is step 2. This is where we go when we don't know where to go or what to do, is we look up and we ask God for wisdom. And the final step is simply this, is we reach out. Slow down, look up, reach out. You'll notice that the next thing that Daniel does, some people say this is the very first prayer meeting, the way that we would understand it in the Bible. The very first time a group of believers just gets together to pray in a small-scale situation about a tough scenario. And so what Daniel does is he gets home and he tells his friends, his closest Christian or faithful, God-fearing and honoring friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You'd know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gathers them together. He lays out the scenario and he says, plead with God for mercy. Pray with me in this that we might be able to figure out what to do. He gathers them together and he asks them for wisdom and to pray with him about this mystery. And so here's what that means to us. See, so often when life gets tough, our circles get smaller. Have you ever noticed that? So often when disaster hits or challenge hits, we have a circle of people around us, but it seems like when disaster hits, our circles, they tend to get smaller rather than larger. We push people out and we push them away and we circle the wagons and we hunker down. When we pull in like that and contract our circles, we make our circles smaller. But what Daniel does when he is faced with an impossible scenario is this, is he enlarges his circle of people who are praying for him and encouraging him and challenging him. Instead of allowing that circle to shrink and to contract when he is in trouble, and we often do this when life isn't going the way that we want to, or maybe we've chosen a path that we should not have chosen and we're embarrassed about it, or we're nervous about the consequences or what people are going to say. We need to hear the wisdom of Daniel in this, where Daniel chooses to enlarge his circle rather than to shrink it. To reach out to faithful Christian followers of Jesus in our lives and say, this is what's going on, what do you think? This is what's happening. Will you pray with me? Will you bang on the door of heaven with me and plead with God for mercy and wisdom and strength? See, this is what we need to do when we are faced with those situations that simply do not have a good option, is we need to reach out. I want to ask you this morning, just as we're going to wind up, who are those people in your life? Who are the people that you would turn to? Are the guys at the bar the people that you would go to? Because I promise you that if you go to them for wisdom and for prayer in these kind of situations, you are going to get neither one of those things. Do you have those people around you right now that you can go to when you're faced with a challenging situation? People that will pray with you, people that will give you wise and godly counsel, faithful Christian friends. And so as we see this template with Daniel, this wisdom in one hand and tact in the other, I believe these are the two weapons that God calls us to walk into these impossible situations with. And so maybe right now, I don't know what situation you're facing. I don't know what's going on in your world right now, whether you need to be in two places at once, whether work is asking something of you that simply cannot be done, or whether it's just a situation that is hard, that just does not seem to have a good path or a good answer. These are the things that I want you to do. Exactly what Daniel did. Ask for time, slow down. Ask for wisdom, look up. And ask faithful friends to gather around you. Reach out. Slow down, look up, reach out. If you want to know how a Christian handles impossible situations, it is exactly that. And we see, and we will see next week in the story, how God incredibly, miraculously came through for Daniel and his friends. But for now, before we go into those answers and the dream that he interpreted, I want you to hear these things. Slow down. Look up. Reach out. Let's pray. Father, I know that we are faced with, we've heard this phrase over and over again, unprecedented challenges, unprecedented situations. God, we pray, and I pray that you would fill each and every person listening now with the wisdom and the tact of Daniel. Give them the ability to slow down. Give them the wisdom to look up, and give them the courage to reach out, that they might find the way and the path that you have paved for them, the path that leads out of this valley and out of this difficult situation. We pray this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
You hear me when I call. You are my morning song. Though darkness fills the night, it cannot hide the light. Whom shall I fear? You crush the enemy underneath my feet. You are my sword and shield, though troubles linger still. Whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me. always by my side. My strength is in your name, for you alone can save. You will deliver me. Yours is the victory. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear? I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. And nothing formed against me shall stand. You hold the whole world in your hands. I'm holding on to your promises. You are faithful. You are faithful. And nothing formed against me shall stand. You hold the whole world in your hands. I'm holding on to your promises. You are faithful. You are faithful. You are faithful. I know who goes before me. I know who stands behind. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. I know who goes before me. I know who stands beside. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The one who reigns forever, he is a friend of mine. The God of angel armies is always by my side. The God of angel armies is